Why this war is happening, I want to set the context for the Iran war. So we know the basic facts, right? The United States launched this war on February 28th. The United States and Israel launched this war on February 28th. They fought 40 days, they bombed 40 days. And after 40 days, the US President Donald Trump announced a ceasefire. And then the ceasefire was followed by 60 days of intense negotiations. And during these 60 days, we also saw skirmishes between the Americans and the Iranians. And then finally, on June 17th, both sides signed a memorandum of understanding. This is the basic framework of what happened. So the war is not over, the conflict is not over. You have a memorandum of understanding, but the tensions persist. And Israel, I think, is adamant that the war has to be brought back. I mean, the Israelis will do everything they can do in their capacity to bring the war back on Iran. So it's a very intense, very tense situation. Why there was this war? Why did the United States bomb Iran on February 28th? I want to set the context first. When I talk about West Asia, you may have heard about Middle East. I always tell my students that I prefer West Asia because geographically speaking, it is West Asia, western part of Asia. Especially for us Indians. We look at West and then we see the Arabian Sea, and across the Arabian Sea you see the Persian Gulf, and then you see the Western, you see the Arab world as well as Israel. So geographically speaking, it's West Asia. So when we talk about West Asia, for us, especially for India and for Malayalis, it's a very close region. Iran is not a country that is lying far away. It's our neighbor. When you cross the Arabian Sea, you reach the Persian Gulf. You just go into the Persian Gulf, you reach the Iranian coast. So Iran is basically our neighbor. It's our extended neighbor. So that's why the war actually affected all of us in one way or the other. Maybe 1 year ago, people would ask you, why are you talking about Israel, Palestine? Let's talk about issues that are happening here, right? And why do you waste time on talking about global issues? Nobody told you the same thing when the Iran war was happening, because you are paying more for your petrol, for your diesel, for your cooking gas, everything. So what is happening in the world can have a direct bearing on you, on your economy. So this war is very close to us. And the Americans and the Israelis brought the war to the region. So when we talk about West Asia, you see, try to understand West Asia from a geopolitical point of view. Who are the main powers in the region? When Israel was created in 1948, the primary contradiction in the region was the rivalry between the Israelis and the Arab world. Right? Arabs on the one side and Israel on the other side. But the contradiction within the contradiction was that both the Arabs and the Israelis were American allies. Right? They were two pillars of America's policy towards West Asia. Iran was also an American ally. Not many people know this. Not many people realize this, that Iran was one of the closest American allies in West Asia until 1979. So in 1979, a revolution happened in Iran. And after the revolution, the Islamists captured power. I mean, I don't call it Islamic revolution, I call it revolution, which became Islamic. And the Islamists captured power. They turned Iran into an Islamic republic. Iran was a monarchy. It was a monarchy. That monarchy existed for thousands of years. And it's interestingly, in 1975, the Iranian monarch held a major event in Iran celebrating 5,000 years of Iranian monarchy. And in 4 years, the monarchy was gone. And then Iran becomes an Islamic republic in 1979. And two of the declared foreign policy goals of the new Iranian government was, one was to defeat the Americans and the other was to liberate Jerusalem, which means defeat Israelis. So they declared the United States and Israel as their two main enemies, the great Satan and the little Satan. So this kind of altered the regional landscape. So one country, Iran, which was a close American ally, which had very close ties with the Israelis, turned out to be the biggest threat to the United States in the region, especially, and to the Israelis in the region. And if you look at Iran, it's a very interesting country from a historical and geopolitical point of view. Just look at Iran's geography. I called it The Revenge of Geography, which is also apparently the title of Robert Kaplan's famous book, The Revenge of Geography. So you look at Iran, it shares border with Pakistan on the one side, and Turkey, Azerbaijan, and the Persian Gulf coast, Iraq. So Turkey is the it used to be the Ottoman great power. And then you have the Caucasian region. And then you have Pakistan, or rather, which used to be the Indian subcontinent, right? And then the Persian Gulf coast. So Iran is at the meeting point of South Asia, the Caucasian region, West Asia, and Central Asia. So it's a very important country. If you have a foothold in Iran, which means you will have access across the region. So everybody wanted to have a slice in Iran. But at the same time, geographically speaking, the Iranian plateau is surrounded by two big mountain ranges. So in 2022, I was in Tehran. So in Iran, they have built a huge tower after the revolution, which is called the Milad Tower. So Iran, if you search Tehran's photos, you will find two towers. One is the Azadi Tower, which was built by the Shah. So the Azadi Maidan is where the Iranians throng whenever there is a public event. Even yesterday, that picture was there. And the other was the Milad Tower, which was built by the revolutionaries after the revolution because they wanted to show the engineering capacity of the newly created government. And this was a declaration of Iran's own engineering marvel. So it's a huge tower, one of the tallest towers in the world. So you can go up to the 12th floor, of course, with a gust or a minder. So we went to the 12th floor, and then you will have a grand view of Tehran. So Tehran is surrounded by the Zagros and Alborz mountains on all sides. It's a city. Basically, the Iranian plateau is ring-fenced by huge mountains. And some of these mountains are white-peaked mountains. So I remember I have written about him in the book, in Original Sin. One of the chapters actually opens with this passage. So the Iranian friend who were actually traveling with us, so he told me, look at this country. We've been doing this for thousands of years. He was talking about Iran's perpetual geopolitics. Do you think they can come and destroy us? This is what he said. So it could sound rhetorical, but at the same time, geography tells you a different story. It's not practically possible to conquer Iran. You could send troops to Iraq. That's what the Americans did in 2003. But the Americans didn't send troops to Iran. They don't want to send troops to Iran. They want to bomb Iran. Why? Because it's not easy to tame Iran. It's not easy to conquer the country. They tried to do that with Afghanistan. Not just the Americans. The Soviets tried to do it. The British tried to do it in 19th century. The Soviets tried to do it in 20th century. The Americans tried to do it in 21st century. Everybody wanted to conquer Afghanistan. And none of these great powers managed to do it. Why? Because Afghanistan's geography tells you the story. It's not easy to conquer Afghanistan. And Iran is many times harder than Afghanistan. But at the same time, because of its geographical importance, everybody wanted to have a foothold in Iran. So when Iran became the Islamic Republic, from the Israeli point of view, as well as from the Arab point of view, there was a major shift in the way they looked at the region. So until then, they looked at each other as their main rivals. And the Arabs, particularly after the 1967 war, in 1967 there was a war between the famous Six-Day War, between the Arabs and the Israelis. And after the 1967 war, the Arabs started moving closer towards the Israelis. In 1978, 1979, Egypt became the first Arab country to have signed a direct agreement, a normalization agreement with Israel, right? And then Iran emerges as a new pillar. And because of its geographical heft, because of the size of the population, and because of its history, the power of its nationalism, the Israelis naturally looked at Iran as a major challenge, as a major threat. And what the Iranians did, they immediately after the Islamists came to power in Iran was, the United States had imposed sanctions on Iran, and the sanctions are still existing. Very tough, biting, crippling sanctions are still existing on Iran. And what the Iranians did, they started supporting different groups across the region. For example, the revolution happened in 1979. In the early 1980s, 1982, Hezbollah was created in Lebanon in the context of an Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. So this is what the Iranians call their forward defense. They also call it their axis of resistance, which means they started supporting different militia groups, and they have their own calculus. They have their own logic to explain this policy. So they support Hezbollah, they support Hamas, because the Iranian point of view is that Hamas is the liberation fighters fighting for the liberation of the Palestinian territory, so they continue to support them. This is what the Iranians are saying. They also support the Houthis in Yemen, and they also support the Hashad al-Shabi in Iraq. So this is what the Iranians call their axis of resistance. So they support different militia groups. And these militia groups also, offer Iran some kind of depth, deterrence, strategic depth in this region, in an extremely hostile region. Because just look at West Asia and the countries, that surround Iran. In the Persian Gulf region, so which are the Persian Gulf region today? You have, of course, Iran, you have Iraq, and then Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, and the United Arab Emirates. And of all these Persian Gulf region, of Persian Gulf countries, there is only one country that doesn't host an American military base, and that's Iran. Everybody else has American military base. And all countries except Oman have permanent American military bases. For example, the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar hosts some 10,000 American troops. And Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia is one of the largest air base facilities in the region. The air base in UAE hosts up to 5 to 10,000 American troops. So Iran is, in this region, Iran is practically surrounded by American bases. And I'll tell you how Iran used this weakness as an advantage during the war. So this is how Iran is placed in the region. And the Israelis always wanted to solve this Iran problem. They always wanted to solve this Iran problem. But they didn't want to go for a direct confrontation with Iran because of the obvious risks. Israel, I know many people, especially in Kerala, I talk to my own friends, they all think that Israel is the Sparta, it is the supreme power that is vanquishing and fighting against all of its enemies. But the Israelis know when it comes to actual problems, they know their own limitations. Of course, they have the support of the United States, but still, they operate in a very complicated, very complex theater. So they didn't want to go for a direct confrontation with the Iranians until recently because they knew the regional equation was set against a direct Iran-Israel conflict. And the Americans, on the other side, they wanted to resolve the Iranian nuclear program. The Israelis wanted to get rid of the Iranian Islamic Republic itself. This is how, the Americans and the Israelis looked at it. The Israelis actually they have always wanted regime change in Iran because they believe that only if they get a regime change in Iran, you bring down the Islamic Republic, and then you get a puppet regime in Tehran, only then you will be able to meet your strategic objectives. This is the Israeli perspective about the region. The Americans on the other side, they know that it's not going to be easy to get a regime change in Iran, especially after what they did in Iraq, especially after what they did in Afghanistan. We know what happened in Afghanistan, right? The Americans went to Afghanistan in 2001, October, and then they toppled the Taliban government. They stayed in Afghanistan for 20 years, and then after 20 years, they left Afghanistan, leaving the same Afghanistan in the hands of the Taliban. This is what they did. So, and in Iraq also, Iraq became a complete catastrophe. 1 million people were killed in Iraq after the American invasion of Iraq. The Americans thought that they were going to liberate Iraq. They thought they were going to liberate Libya. And Libya was one of the most stable countries in North Africa. And you look at Libya today, it was President Obama's war in Libya in 2011. Iraq was George Bush's war. Afghanistan was George Bush's war. So Iran, the Americans knew, was not going to be easy. So they wanted to tackle, especially Obama, wanted to tackle the nuclear program. Because, again, the same question comes to us many times. Israel is a nuclear power. Everybody knows. Israel made their bomb in the 1960s. The Iranians have a nuclear program. They have a very active nuclear program. They have multiple nuclear facilities. Fordo, Isfahan, and Natanz. These three are their primary nuclear facilities. And they also have Bushehr, which is a Russian-built plant, and Arak, which is a heavy water plant. And the Iranians also have developed their own capacity to enrich uranium. And they have enriched uranium to up to 60% purity. So they have roughly 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium. So, again, I'm not a physicist. I know there are a lot of, a lot among the audience who have a solid science background. So please pardon me if I make mistakes. So the 60% enriched uranium is technically only a step away from the weapon grade level, which is 90+% uranium. So the Iranians, practically, they are a nuclear threshold state. So if they want to make the bomb, they can make the bomb within days. So Iran has a solid nuclear program. So the United States and the Israelis and several other countries were opposed to Iran's nuclear program. And from the Israeli point of view, what happens if Iran makes the bomb? I know that, nuclear bombs are not a solution to anything, but in a very perilous world we are living in, very chaotic world we are living in, countries use nuclear bomb as a means of deterrence against greater powers. So if Iran makes the bomb, Israel's monopoly in the region as the sole nuclear power would be broken. Israel is currently the only nuclear power. And if Iran makes the bomb, if that nuclear monopoly is broken, the balance of power in West Asia would be shifted. And if the balance of power in West Asia is shifted, Israel will not have the freedom which it currently has to operate in its neighborhood. It can bomb any country it wants to bomb, right? It's bombing Gaza, it's bombing Lebanon, it's bombing Syria, it had bombed Iran. So you look at this level of freedom no other country has, I think. The Russians are bombing Ukraine, but the Russia is facing, terrible sanctions from the West. Nobody wants to impose any sanctions on the Israelis. So Israel has that freedom because it has the backing of the United States and it has the regional balance of power supports the Israelis. If Iran makes the bomb, the balance of power would be shifted. So that's why both the Israelis and the Americans are opposed to Iran making a nuclear bomb. So the Americans wanted to tackle this. So that's why the Obama administration back in 2013 started direct negotiations with the Iranians and they reached an agreement in 2015. And as part of that agreement, Iran agreed to curtail its nuclear program, open up its nuclear facilities for the IAEA inspection. Iran promised that they would never make a bomb. In return for the United States and the West lifting sanctions on Iran. The Obama administration had signed this agreement. This is called the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. But the Israelis were not happy with that. So the Americans, especially the Obama administration, they looked at it, they had a nuanced view. Their view was that regime change was beyond the practical means. And they wanted to solve the nuclear program, stop Iran from becoming a nuclear power. And in return, they promised to lift sanctions. But the Israelis were not happy with the fact that the sanctions are being lifted. Because if you are lifting sanctions, as I told you earlier, Iran is a big country and it has one of the world's largest hydrocarbon resources. It has untapped crude oil resources, because it's been under sanctions throughout. So if you lift the sanctions, if Iran brings in investments, if Iran starts making money, if Iran starts making a stronger military, then Iran will become, even without a nuclear bomb, Iran will become a much powerful conventional force in West Asia, which would also change the balance of power, and the Israelis did not want this to happen. I remember having a conversation with an Israeli diplomat back in 2020, and I asked her the same question. Don't you think that even, the Israelis called the deal, the JCPOA was a very bad deal. I asked her, isn't it better to have a bad deal rather than having no deal at all? She said, no, we don't want a bad deal. We would prefer a no deal because with a no deal, we could go to war with the Iranians. This is how the Israelis always looked at it. So then in 2016, Donald Trump comes to power. So this is like, West Asia has its own problems, right? West Asia is like the Gotham City, Batman's story. West Asia is like the Gotham City. It's chaotic. There are, bellicose lords and they fight against each other, but still there is some order even amidst the chaos. And then the Joker comes, destroys everything. This is what happened in 2016. Donald Trump became the president, and one of the first things he did was to unilaterally withdraw the United States out of the JCPOA, saying this is the worst deal in America's history. I'm sure he might be repenting now. That was his first mistake. He pulled the United States out of the Obama deal, and then he reimposed sanctions. And Trump thought that if the Iranians could talk to the Obama administration and make a deal with them, why can't they do the same thing with me? This is what he thought. But the Iranians had a different perspective. The Iranians thought that we held 3 years of negotiations with the Americans, painstaking negotiations with the Americans. We signed the agreement. We opened up our nuclear program. We invited the IAEA. We curtailed our enrichment capacity. We did everything, and the Americans promised that they would lift the sanctions, and another American president comes, and everything goes kaput. This is how the Iranians looked at it. When we talk about the Iran conflict, it's mostly said from the American perspective. Nobody is trying to explain it from the Iranian perspective. Like Stephen Walt recently said, other people also have histories. The Iranians have their own history. They looked at the whole incident differently. So what the Iranians did? They didn't want to talk to the Trump administration. Instead, they went back to nuclear enrichment. That's when they started enriching uranium up to 60%. Back in 2015, they were only enriching up to 20%. They scaled it up. They escalated. So this is what the Iranians did. So this set the stage for the conflict. And then Trump came back to power just 2 years ago. We know that before that, in October 2023, Hamas carried out this attack on Israelis. That was a defining moment, a watershed moment in West Asia. So after the Hamas attack, what the Israelis did, they immediately started their war on Gaza, right? I met a doctor who served in Gaza. What happened in Gaza is, everybody knows, it's horrible, it's beyond that. We have a lot of testimonies, UN investigations and everything. What is happening, what is going on in Gaza. So the Israelis started this war on Gaza, and they didn't confine the war only to Gaza. So Israel sensed an opportunity after October 7 to regionalize their conflict, because their ultimate objective, as I told you earlier, was Iran, not just Palestine. So they started bombing Gaza, they started bombing Lebanon, because in Lebanon, they went after Hezbollah. In Syria, they started bombing the Syrian government positions. Those days, the Syrian government was Bashar al-Assad's government. And Bashar al-Assad's government was a close ally of Iran and Hezbollah. What the Israelis wanted was to bring down the Bashar al-Assad government in Syria. Because once Bashar al-Assad falls, the link between Hezbollah and Iran will be snapped. And once that link is snapped, both Iran and Hezbollah would be weakened. And once they are weakened, you can go after both of them. This is what the Israelis wanted to do. And it's very interesting that in Syria, the Israelis carried out thousands of airstrikes in Syria, and they never attacked this group called HTS. HTS is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. This group was based in this northern Syrian province called Idlib. And their leader was this guy called Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani. Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani was the leader of Fateh Jabhat al-Nusra. And Jabhat al-Nusra was the official Syrian branch of Al-Qaeda. They never targeted him. Instead, they went after the Syrian government. And it's interesting that in November 2024, after Israel carried out 1 month of bombing on Hezbollah, Hezbollah was forced to retreat. Hezbollah was forced to withdraw their troops from Syria, where they were supporting the Syrian government. So Hezbollah was on the back foot in Lebanon. And then Jolani's forces started moving towards Damascus of course, with support from the Turks. They started moving towards Damascus from Idlib. And within 12 days, he would take over Damascus. The Syrian government would fall. So now Jolani, who calls himself Al-Shara, he changed his name because nobody wanted to identify him with the same old Al-Qaeda guy. So he changed his name, he changed the name of his organization. But, he's the president of Syria today. And he went to the White House, he met Trump, they had a great photograph, etc., etc. And the Israelis are also pretty happy with Al-Qaeda being in charge of Syria. They didn't want Bashar al-Assad. And when Assad came down in December 2024, it was evident that the Israelis would bomb Iran. And that's exactly what happened in 2025, June. This is what we call the 12-day war. In June 2025, the Israelis started bombing Iran because their ultimate goal is to take the Iranian government down. And the Israelis started bombing Iran. Iran started retaliating. They started firing back missiles towards Israel. And the United States, on June 21st, the United States carried out one single strike in Iran. They are B-2 bombers, and they used bunker busters to attack the 3 Iranian nuclear facilities, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. And after that, Trump famously declared that he had obliterated Iran's nuclear program. He said he had obliterated Iran's nuclear program, and then he brought in a ceasefire. And the Israeli generals compared their attack, the initial June 12 attack, to the Red Wedding In Game of Thrones, you know what red wedding is. When the House Stark was assassinated, was murdered by House Frey at the behest of the Lannisters. So the Israelis called it red wedding because they claimed that they killed a lot of Iranian generals and that had decapitated Iran's military force. And the Americans claimed that they had destroyed Iran's nuclear program, except that they didn't. So there were two problems. One, everybody knew an Israeli attack was imminent. And if people like us knew an Israeli attack was imminent, the Iranians definitely knew an Israeli attack was coming. The Iranians definitely knew. And if the Iranians knew an Israeli attack was coming, the question is, why should they keep their 60% enriched uranium in the same nuclear facilities that they were damn sure would be targeted by the Americans and the Israelis? So there is a very high possibility that the Iranians had disbursed their highly enriched uranium across the country. And it's a very, very big country, 75 times bigger than Israel. And then the second problem is that immediately after the war, Iran cut off IAEA's access to its nuclear facilities, which means Iran's nuclear program went absolutely dark. So after this, the Americans and the Israelis actually started panicking. Because until then, the IAEA had its eyes and ears on Iranian nuclear program. Now they don't. And then you have all kinds of theories. Massachusetts Professor Pascal said that Iran had already become a nuclear power. He said that it would take only, Iran has nuclear deterrence. He argued that if Iran ever comes under nuclear attack from the Israelis, Iran can basically retaliate within days. It won't take much time to assemble a bomb using the existing industrial capacity because they have the centrifuges, they have the highly enriched uranium. So the Israelis definitely wanted to take another shot. And another shot means they wanted regime change. In Jan 2026, there was a massive protest in Iran, the protest was started by the traders in Tehran in December 2026, which snowballed into a large nationwide protest. Donald Trump immediately stepped in. He offered support for the protesters. He said help is on the way. He asked the Iranians to take over their institutions. And the Israelis, Mossad was tweeting. I know that because I've been following this to write about it. Mossad was live tweeting saying that they were standing with the Iranian protesters on the ground, protesting for Iran's freedom. And Mike Pompeo, the former CIA director and former state secretary, had also tweeted on Jan 1st, 2026, that Happy New Year to all the Iranians and all the Mossad agents who are standing beside them. It's on the paper. You can go and check it on Twitter. It's on the record. So, yes, definitely there was genuine anger towards the government. I'm not discounting that. Iran is a semi-oppressive system with some kind of democratic representation, but it's a country that is also living under sanctions with practically no economic progress at all, which is producing oppression on the one side, lack of economic progress on the other side. That is a deadly combo. That is triggering cycles of protests in Iran. Protests for social freedom, protests for economic empowerment, improvement, etc., etc. That's what you saw in Jan as well. But it was also egged on by other actors were also present. And the Iranians crushed the protest on Jan 8th and 9th, 2 nights of massive crackdown. So they crushed the protests. And then pressure started mounting on Donald Trump because he had offered help. And the Israeli plan was that they thought if the Americans and the Israelis start another war, if they decapitate the state, you take out Ali Khamenei, who is the supreme leader, you kill all the top echelons of Iran's military leadership, their theory was that the Iranian regime, the state, would collapse. They thought that if you take out Khamenei, there would be chaos on the streets, and in that chaos, the Kurds would be empowered. They were already armed, so they can move from the western side, and then the Baluchis can move from the southern side. And out of this chaos, there would be a new leadership that is more amenable, more accommodative, would emerge to take control of the country. This was the plan. And Trump also thought that the war would be over in 3 days. Because there is this conversation between Trump and Keir Starmer, which was reported. because Trump asked Starmer that on February 28, he wanted Starmer to send the British aircraft carriers to the Persian Gulf. He said that, this is exactly what Trump said. He said that I know that all of your aircraft carriers are so bad, but still, if you want to send them, you send them to the Persian Gulf. The Starmer said that I need to discuss it with my team, so I'll get back to you next week. Trump said next week would be too far away. The war has already begun and it's going to be over in 3 days. He started the war on Saturday when markets were closed, and Trump thought that the war would be over on Monday, like what he did in Venezuela. But he was proved wrong. Their expectation was that the Iranian state would collapse if you kill Khamenei. That didn't happen. So the Iranian response, if you look at it, first of all, I think the Iranians were prepared for the war this time, better than June 2025. They knew the crisis was not over, and they had a plan. Their response, I would say, that had 3 parts. One was to preserve the state. Because if you don't have the state, you don't have anybody to fight for. Right? So, preserve the state. This was the first response, the first plan. The second was to regionalize the war. In June 2025, the Iranians responded by attacking only Israel. They didn't touch the Arab countries. They didn't touch the Strait of Hormuz. They attacked only Israel. Israel bombed us. We are retaliating against them. This was the plan. This was their response in June 2025. But this time, they regionalized the war. The first country they attacked was Bahrain. The 5th Fleet headquarters in Manama. And then the third thing that they used, which was their trump card, was closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So this is how the Iranians responded. If you look at the American demands or the Israeli demands before the war, they had listed out 4 demands, right? They wanted to destroy Iran's nuclear program. They wanted to destroy Iran's missile program. They wanted to stop Iran from supporting Iran's non-state allies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis. And they wanted regime change. Just look at the 4 demands. The 3 demands are linked to the 4th one. Because no Iranian president is going to say, okay, fine, I'm going to stop making bombs. I'm going to give up my missiles. No Iranian leader can afford to say that, right? You will get an Iranian leader to say that only if you get a regime change and you get a puppet in place in Tehran. So all the 3 demands, the first 3 demands are linked to the 4th demand. The 4th demand or the 4th objective was the most important objective. And that objective was to bring about regime change. And I told you it's not easy to invade Iran because of its geography, topography, because of the ideologically rooted Iranian state, because of the availability of millions of IRGC to fight for that state. It's not like Saddam Hussein's Baathist Iraq. Far from that. So it's not possible to invade. So the plan is to bomb, decapitate, sow chaos, and out of the chaos you build another state. This was the plan. So the Iranian response was primarily to preserve the state. And they succeeded. They prevailed. One of the first things they did was that the Supreme National Security Council, which at that time was headed by Ali Larijani, you might know him, he was the philosopher king. He was also assassinated on March 17th by the Israelis, but when the war began, Larijani was already in control. Khamenei was assassinated, but Larijani stepped in, and the Supreme National Security Council took over the state affairs. And the IRGC commander was also killed. Pakapur was killed. And then a new commander stepped in and took over IRGC. His name is Ahmad Wahidi. He is called the Ghost General because he made his first appearance just now, yesterday, during the funeral ceremony of Ali Khamenei. So IRGC emerged as the main response vehicle, while the Supreme National Security Council kind of restored the state after the initial blow. So they preserved the state. And then they regionalized the war. They attacked Bahrain, they attacked Kuwait, they attacked Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. Even Oman was targeted. Oman was more or less aligned with the Iranians before the war, but even Oman wasn't spared. Because the Iranians knew that always you looked at American bases. They were surrounded by American bases, and this was seen as the biggest threat Iran had faced. And Iran turned that biggest threat into a wartime opportunity. They started attacking all these countries, and their explanation was that they were not attacking the UAE, they were not attacking Qatar, they were attacking the American base in Qatar. The cornerstone of the partnership between the Persian Gulf countries and the United States was that the United States would provide them security. But during the 40 days of war, nobody provided them security. Instead, the UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia had to burn through their defensive arsenals to protect the American bases in their country. So Iran effectively regionalized the war by targeting all these countries. And the third thing is that they closed down the Strait of Hormuz. So the Strait of Hormuz it's one of the most important choke points in the world. The Strait of Hormuz is basically, it's the mouth connecting the Persian Gulf to the Sea of Oman, the Gulf of Oman. And the Gulf of Oman opens into the Arabian Sea. Most of the Arab countries, they export their Persian Gulf countries, they export their oil and gas from their ports in the Persian Gulf, which means all their containers, their tankers, their vessels have to go through the strait. And at its narrowest point, the Strait of Hormuz is just 35 kilometers wide between the Iranian and the Omani coast. So all Iran had to do was to send a couple of drones to tell the shippers that you are not allowed to pass through the strait. They don't have to enforce a military blockade. Because once you start attacking the ships, the risks go up. The insurance premium goes up. And then the containers would stop transiting the route. So this is what the Iranians did on day 2 of the war. They shut down Strait of Hormuz. And 1/5 of the world's oil passed to the strait. The Iranians always knew that the strait would be a great weapon in their hands. They refused to use it until recently. But this war, they looked at this war, and then they saw an existential threat because their supreme leader was assassinated. The Americans wanted regime change. President Trump was threatening to erase the civilization. Right? He wanted to bomb Iran's power facilities, desalination plants. So the Iranians saw this as an existential threat, and then they closed down the Strait of Hormuz, which means the traffic through the strait came to a standstill in the initial 40 days of the war. Which also meant that international oil prices started going up. It went up to 114 and 120. That means inflation will go up. Gas prices went up because its largest gas terminal was bombed by the Iranians because an Iranian oil field was bombed by the Israelis. And the Americans thought that they destroyed most of that's what Pete Hegseth said initially, they destroyed most of Iran's missile capability, but the Iranians kept firing even after 40 days of war. They kept attacking. They kept attacking Israel. They kept attacking the Arab Gulf countries. I was talking to Professor Marandi in the initial days of the war, and then he told me that when we talk, at that time he sounded rhetorical, but after the war, when I look back at him, he sounded more reasonable than many Western analysts who were giving live commentaries about the war. He told me that when we talk, the Iranians are making missiles and drones. We have deeply buried underground facilities where we continue to make our missiles. If the Americans think that they can come and bomb us and destroy our attack capabilities, they were mistaken. They were naive. This is what he said, and he turned out to be true. So these two strategies, they preserved the state and they regionalized the war. They shut the Strait of Hormuz, enhancing the economic cost, the cost on the global economy. This is how Iran prevailed. And from the American point of view, their best shot was bringing out regime change. And once they lost that game, once that window was closed, there was nothing much to do. You can continue to bomb Iran, but at what cost? And what are you going to get in return? Doing the same thing again and again, expecting a different result. And you are not getting that different result. The Iranians were holding firm. And there was no military solution to the Strait of Hormuz either. For example, the Americans imposed a naval blockade on April 13th, a naval blockade on Iranian ports. And the American point of view was that if the economic cost goes up, then Iran would relent at some point. This is what the Americans thought. The Iranians never relented. And their point of view was that they were not going to open up the Strait of Hormuz unless the war is brought to an end. And the interesting subtext is that Strait of Hormuz, which has now become the biggest talking point of this conflict, the biggest talking point on the negotiation table, was open on February 27th. It was open on February 27th. The Iranians closed it only after the war the Americans and the Israelis launched. And now the United States wants the Iranians to reopen the Strait of Hormuz as part of an agreement. This is what they want. What the Iranians did when the United States imposed the blockade, what the Iranians did, they told the Americans that bringing the war to an end and removing the bottlenecks, which means reopening the Strait of Hormuz, removing the American naval blockade, and only then, and then get a ceasefire on Lebanon, and only then we will talk about the nuclear program. This is the position the Iranians had taken. An MOU was signed on June 17th. It was announced on June 15th, signed on June 17th. And if you read the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, Trump had made all kind of wild, sweeping claims on his Truth Social post. He said that he had destroyed Iran's navy, he had destroyed Iran's air force, he had destroyed Iran's attack capabilities. They are finished. Iran was deleted. This is what he said in one of his posts. It's great entertainment to read him in the evenings, especially. But if you read fine text of the MOU, it's interesting. Even I was surprised. When I was trying to follow the war very closely, and I knew that the Iranians were not going to make any major concessions, but even I was surprised because the Americans had made a lot of concessions in the text. There is going to be a 300 billion development fund for Iran's reconstruction. And the MOU which President Trump had signed says that the United States would help set up that fund. Iran would get access to some $24 billion of unfrozen funds. When Obama signed the agreement, he sent $1.7 billion and Trump made a huge fuss out of it. Now $24 billion they will get access to. And Trump also says that there has to be a regional ceasefire, including in Lebanon, and Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity has to be respected. And the MOU also says that the United States and Iran will respect each other's sovereignty and then stay away from issuing threats, etc., etc. Whether Trump is going to respect these commitments is a different matter, but still, if you read the text, this is a text signed by both presidents. And it's astonishing the kind of concessions the United States has given after they claimed that they had won the war. And the Iranians on the other side, their most important pledge, promise, commitment is that they will never make a nuclear bomb, which has been their position since 1979. And they had made even this position on the record in 2015 when they signed the nuclear agreement with the Obama administration. They repeated that position. We are not going to make the bomb. And then, only after the MOU was signed, both sides are going to start negotiations on the nuclear program. They haven't reached an agreement on the nuclear program. They are going to start negotiations on the nuclear program. Just think about it. Such a setback this is for the United States. Obama at least had a deal in 2015. Now Trump has a deal to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which was open before his war. And now he has to start talking to the Iranians about the nuclear program. So when it comes to the nuclear program, there are two major hurdles. So one is, what will happen to Iran's enriched uranium? The 60% enriched uranium. The second question is that what will happen to what Iran calls its right to enrich, continue to enrich uranium, which means Iran doesn't want to enrich it up to 60% or 90%. It might want to enrich it up to 3.67%, which is the nuclear power grade. So these are the two sticking points. And after this war, after the assassination of Khamenei, and I will be surprised if the Iranians make any major concessions on these two sticking points in the final agreement. The Iranians are not going to let the enriched uranium being shipped out of the country. They are not going to stop enriching uranium as part of a final agreement. They might be open for scuttling their nuclear program, which is what Obama had achieved. So Trump, at the end of the day, if he is going to get a final agreement, he is going to get a JCPOA 2.0. He is not going to get a remarkably different agreement. And that's not the end of the story. Before the war, at least Iran faced the threat of an American attack. And that threat, the threat can actually be a more powerful tool than the actual war. Always. Before Russia's Ukraine invasion, Russia was seen as a very powerful power, emerging power in Europe. Europeans would not like to threaten Russia. So the actual war, would change the facts on the ground sometimes. The Iranians, on 27th of February 2026, the Iranians had offered massive concessions according to the Omani foreign minister. They were ready for a deal. The Americans didn't take the deal. They went for war. So now, the threat of war is a spent force. From an Iranian perspective, they have seen the worst and they survived it. Why should they now make concessions to the Americans? That's one thing, right? And then the second thing is that this war is this is a major strategic defeat for the United States. I'll explain why. One, the window for the regime change has been closed, I think, forever. I don't think Trump is going to pursue for a regime change anymore. The Israelis would still dream about it, but they don't have the capacity to do it alone. They want the Americans. but I think that window has been closed. Two, Iran has emerged regionally stronger by taking over the Strait of Hormuz. And they are not going to give up their control over Strait of Hormuz. Mark my words. Because for Iran, Strait of Hormuz is not about collecting tolls or service charges. For them, this is now a matter of deterrence. They know that they control the strait, which means the Americans will think twice before they start the next war. So they want to control the strait. They are not going to give up their control over the strait. The promise they made in the MOU is that they would let the pre-war traffic to resume. They would let ships pass, but ships will have to coordinate with the IRGC. They have already established a new authority, Persian Gulf Strait Authority, a new institution they have created to manage the Strait of Hormuz. They are also in talks with the Omanis. So they are not going to give up their control over the strait. So which means they have emerged regionally stronger. Three, the bedrock of the US-Arab Gulf Partnership was the security promise of the United States, or rather the American security umbrella. The Iranians had drilled holes into that security umbrella. It doesn't exist anymore. Nobody came for their rescue. Nobody came for the defense of the UAE or the Saudis or the Qataris during the 40 days of the war. So, which means, at the end of the day, countries will have to, even America's closest allies, will have to look at these developments and recalibrate their approaches. And I'm sure that they might not be able to snap their ties with the Americans, but they will definitely reconsider their relationship with Iran, because for these countries, Iran is now a bigger reality. They will have to coexist with the Iranians, because the Iranians are not going to go anywhere. Four, Israel, which took the war to Iran after October 7. Israel has been fighting many wars since October 7, right? In Lebanon, in Syria, and in Gaza, it continues to bomb in Gaza. And Israel is the country that took the war to Iran. In April 2024, Israel bombed the Iranian embassy in Damascus. This was the beginning. Israel bombed the Iranian embassy in Damascus and the Iranians responded, right? And then Israel also killed Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, when he was in Tehran. So Israelis took the war to Iran because the Israelis thought that post-October 7, they had the great opportunity to reshape the region militarily. The Israelis wanted to create a unipolar West Asia with Israel being its center and the United States being its guardian and Arab countries signing up for this new order. The Abraham Accords set the stage for this. The Americans brought the UAE and the Israelis together. And the Palestine issue was pushed to the margins of West Asia. An Israeli diplomat recently told me nobody bothers about Gaza. This is how the Israelis look at it. They don't want to talk about the Palestine issue. They think because of the Iranian threat, the Arabs are coming to them, and Israel wanted to reshape West Asia, as a unipolar region under its power and influence. That opportunity has also passed. So if you look at it from any point of view, this war has turned out to be a strategic disaster for the United States and Israel. But that doesn't mean that everything is fine for the Iranians, no. That country is in deep economic trouble. Their economy is not growing. And at this point of time, the Iranians might not be hitting the streets because nationalism is a very powerful ideology. Their country is being bombed. The American president is threatening to erase their civilization, so they are rallying behind the flag. That doesn't mean that once the dust settles, if the Iranian government is not able to address at least the economic grievances of the people, or if they fail to reform themselves, if the Iranian state needs reform, then there could be problems for them. So Iran has to find a way, in one way or the other, to address the economic problems immediately. And for them, that is the incentive the Iranians have to make a deal, eventually to make a deal with the Americans to get the sanctions lifted, and by offering concessions on the nuclear program. So you look at it from the Iranian point of view, or the American point of view, or the Persian Gulf point of view, this war has been a watershed event in West Asia's history, and it is rewriting, when we speak, it is rewriting the regional balance of power. This is something that is comparable to the Suez War of 1956. Before 1956, Britain was a great power in West Asia. And today, even the Brits don't believe that story. They are completely out of West Asia. And the Americans stepped in to the Persian Gulf region after the Suez War. Now, the Persian Gulf region is asking this question to themselves. The Americans came here offering security, and there was no security at all during the war. So they need to find a new modus vivendi with the Iranians. And the Iranians seem determined to keep their control over the Strait of Hormuz and act as a new regional major power. That's how the war has changed the region. Thank you very much.